The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, folded twice, its edges worn thin as if it had been opened and closed more than once before it ever reached its destination. It was not written on heavy stationery or embossed paper. It was written on plain, inexpensive notebook paper. It's the kind sold in bulk to public schools and families who counted every dollar. The ink was blue, slightly faded in places, and the handwriting careful. Almost apologetic, suggested someone who had rewritten every sentence in her head before daring to put it down in another house. In another time, that letter might never have been opened. Dean Martin received thousands of letters every year. Fan mail, business proposals, requests, pleas, invitations, condolences. Praise so loud it felt hollow. Criticism so sharp it felt rehearsed. Most of it never made it to his hands. Assistants filtered it. Managers skimmed it. Lawyers reviewed it. What reached him was usually polished, intentional, and safe. This letter was none of those things. It had no glittering language, no grand declarations of admiration, no demand, no threat. It did not even begin with his name in bold confidence. It began with an apology. "I'm sorry to bother you, Mr. Martin. I know you are very busy. I wouldn't write if I didn't feel. I had no other way to teach my students something important." The house was quiet when Dean unfolded the page. The kind of quiet that came when the world expected nothing of you for a moment. He had poured coffee he wouldn't finish. He had planned to glance at headlines he wouldn't remember. The day was already scheduled down to the minute. But the letter stopped him not with drama, but with honesty. The writer introduced herself as Eleanor Hayes, a schoolteacher in a small industrial town most people passed through without slowing down. She did not describe herself as remarkable. She did not list achievements. She described a classroom with peeling paint, desks older than the children sitting in them, and a heater that worked only when winter was already over. Then she wrote about a girl. Her name was Lucy Bennett. Lucy was 11 years old. Bright in a quiet way, the kind of child who listened so carefully that teachers sometimes mistook her silence for absence. She was good with numbers. She stayed late to help erase boards. She folded her homework neatly even when it was written on reused paper. She never complained, but she often looked tired in a way no child should. Eleanor did not ask for money. She did not ask for publicity. She did not ask Dean Martin to visit the school or mention Lucy's name on stage. She asked for something far smaller and far riskier. "I told Lucy a story about you," the letter said. "I told her that once, long before the lights and the music. You were a boy who had to work when others didn't. I told her you knew what it meant to feel invisible. I told her that sometimes kindness comes from people the world thinks are too busy to care. I told her that if she ever felt like her effort didn't matter, she could write to you not because you would fix her life, but because you might understand it." Eleanor admitted she did not know if the story was fully accurate. She admitted she might have simplified things. She admitted that she might have given a child false hope. "If I was wrong," she wrote, "then please forgive me. But if there is any truth in it, I wanted Lucy to learn that compassion does not disappear just because someone becomes famous." The letter ended without a signature. Flourish. Just a name, a return address, and one final line written smaller than the rest. "Please do not feel obligated to reply." Even reading this would be more than enough. Dean sat back. He did not laugh. He did not smile. He did not call an assistant to ask who let this through. He stared at the paper longer than he meant to. The way one stares at a photograph that reminds them of something they have tried very hard to forget. Because Eleanor Hayes was right about one thing. Before the stage lights, before the tuxedos, before the effortless charm people mistook for ease, there had been a boy who learned early that survival was louder than dreams. Dean had been that boy. He remembered hands that smelled of factory dust. He remembered rooms where voices were sharp because money was thin. He remembered learning, slowly and painfully, that being likable was sometimes the only way to avoid being ignored. He remembered how kindness, when it appeared, felt like oxygen, and he remembered how rare it was. The letter did not ask him to save Lucy Bennett. It asked him to acknowledge her. And somehow, that felt heavier. He folded the paper carefully, not wanting to crease it more than it already was. He stood and walked to the window, looking out at a world that had learned how to applaud him without knowing him. Fame had given him everything people thought mattered: control, comfort, distance. But this letter reached past all of that. It reminded him of a promise he had never spoken out loud, but had once believed in with everything he had, that if he ever made it out, he would not forget what it felt like to be left behind. Most people would have dictated a polite reply, a few kind sentences, a signed photograph, something safe, something appropriate, something that checked the box labeled gracious celebrity response. Dean did not do that. He sat down at the table, pulled a blank sheet of paper toward him, and stared at it longer than he stared at Eleanor's letter. The first line mattered. He knew that. Whatever he wrote would be read slowly, possibly aloud, possibly more than once, possibly for the rest of a young girl's life. He did not write as Dean Martin the star. He wrote as someone who remembered being 11 and unsure whether the world was listening. Dear Lucy. He began, and then he stopped. He tore the page in half, because suddenly, dear felt too distant. He started again. Hello, Lucy. That felt right. He wrote about work, not glamorous work, but tiring work. He wrote about days when he felt small and replaceable. He wrote about learning to sing not because he believed in destiny, but because it was something he could do when nothing else seemed to fit. He did not promise success. He did not offer advice that sounded like a speech. He did not tell her everything would be fine. Instead, he told her the truth, that effort matters even when no one is watching, that kindness is a skill, not a weakness, that being overlooked does not mean being unimportant, and that sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is keep going without applause. He wrote until the coffee went cold, until the house felt smaller, until the distance between a man and a child, a star and a student, disappeared entirely. When he finished, he did not sign it with flourish. He signed it simply Deont. But the letter was not the thing that would change everything, because after sealing the envelope, Dean did something almost no one in his position would have considered, something no publicist would have recommended, and no headline would have captured honestly. He pulled out a calendar and began to make room. Not for a show. Not for an appearance. Not for a photograph. For a promise that had never been asked for, but once remembered, could not be ignored. The envelope arrived on a Thursday afternoon, slipped between a grocery flyer and a utility bill, its weight so light that Lucy Bennett almost missed it entirely. She was standing in the narrow hallway of their apartment building, the kind of hallway where the paint had been touched up so many times it no longer matched itself, balancing a paper bag of bread against her hip while fishing the mail from the rusted metal box labeled 3B. Her mother was still at work. She always was at that hour. Lucy did not recognize the handwriting at first. It was neat, careful, but not stiff. There was no printed logo, no flashy stamp, no indication that this envelope had crossed paths with anything glamorous. It looked ordinary. It's almost disappointing. She assumed it was another school notice. She was already halfway inside the apartment when she noticed the return address. She froze. For a long moment, the hallway seemed to hold its breath with her. The flickering bulb above buzzed softly. Somewhere downstairs, a door slammed. The world continued doing what it always did, moving forward without waiting. Lucy stared at the name written in the corner. Not printed, written. Her hands began to shake. Not with excitement exactly, but with something closer to fear. The kind of fear that comes when hope feels dangerous. When believing in something feels like it might cost more than it gives. She set the bread down carefully, as if any sudden movement might make the envelope disappear. She sat on the floor with her back against the wall, knees pulled in. The mail spread out beside her like evidence. She did not open it right away. She had learned early that disappointment arrived faster when you rushed toward it instead. She traced the edge of the envelope with her finger. She read the return address again. She pressed her thumb against the paper and felt the faint impression of handwriting from the other side. Someone had written this slowly, thoughtfully. Someone had not delegated it. Finally, Lucy slid a finger beneath the seal and opened it. The letter inside was not long, but it felt heavy in her hands. The paper was thicker than what she was used to at school, but not fancy. The ink was dark, confident, alive. She read the first line. "Hello, Lucy." That was all it took. Something in her chest tightened so suddenly that she had to stop. She looked around the hallway, as if expecting someone to be watching her read this private moment. As if the building itself might accuse her of imagining things. She read on. The letter did not sound like a speech. It did not sound like advice meant to be framed. It sounded like someone talking to her, not at her, not over her, but with her. He wrote about being tired when he was young, about learning that not everyone starts in the same place, and that unfairness does not announce itself, it just quietly decides things for you. He wrote about work that left his hands sore and his mind louder than he wanted it to be. He wrote about music as something that came after effort, not before it. Then came the line Lucy would reread more times than she could count. "If you ever feel invisible, doesn't mean you are unseen. It only means the right eyes haven't found you yet." Her throat burned. No one had ever said that to her before. The letter did not promise miracles. It did not say everything will change. It said something braver. Keep doing the small things well. They are not small to the people who need them. At the bottom, there was no autograph swirl, no title. Just a name. Dean Lucy sat there long after she finished reading. The paper pressed flat against her knees, her fingers smoothing it as if it might wrinkle if she let go. For the first time in a long while, the weight she carried, the quiet, constant awareness that she was replaceable, felt lighter. When her mother came home that evening, Lucy was unusually quiet. She waited until dinner was finished, until the dishes were washed and stacked, until the apartment had settled into its usual nighttime stillness. Then she handed her the letter. Her mother read it standing at the counter, one hand resting against the sink. Halfway through, she stopped and covered her mouth. By the end, her eyes were wet. "He didn't have to do this," she whispered. Lucy nodded. "I know." What neither of them knew was that the letter was only the beginning. Across the country, in a city where nothing truly slowed down, Dean Martin was being told politely, repeatedly, firmly that he was making a mistake. "You replied," his assistant said carefully, as if choosing the wrong word might trigger something irreversible. "That's generous. That's enough." Dean did not answer right away. "There's no need to go further," she continued. "People take things the wrong way. Expectations grow. Stories change." He nodded, because he understood the system better than anyone. Fame was not dangerous because of the attention. It was dangerous because of the assumptions. Because kindness once seen became obligation. Because sincerity, once public, was rarely allowed to remain pure. But this was not about publicity. This was about a teacher who had risked lying to give a child hope, and a child who had believed. Her dean had spent years avoiding unnecessary attention. He had mastered the art of being present without being available. But the letter had cracked something open that success had sealed shut. He asked for the school's address, not to announce a visit, not to arrange cameras, not to schedule anything official, just the address. When his assistant hesitated, Dean looked at her not sharply, not angrily, but with a quiet certainty that ended the conversation. "I'm not going as Dean Martin," he said. "I'm going as someone who remembers." At school, Eleanor Hayes noticed the change in Lucy before she ever learned the reason. Lucy raised her hand more often. Not confidently, but bravely. She stayed later, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. When other children laughed too loudly or dismissed her too quickly, Lucy did not disappear the way she used to. She held her ground. One afternoon, Eleanor found a folded piece of paper on her desk. It was Lucy's handwriting. He wrote back, "Eleanor," sat down slowly. She did not tell anyone. Not the principal. Not her colleagues. Not even her sister, who loved celebrity stories more than most people loved sleep. Because something told her this was fragile, and because deep down, she feared what might happen if the world touched it too soon, The school continued as it always did. Bells, chalk dust, noise, exhaustion. No one noticed when an unfamiliar name appeared on the visitor sign-in log weeks later, written in plain ink. Without a title, no one noticed the man who walked through the front doors dressed simply, carrying no entourage. Waiting patiently, as the secretary searched for the right classroom, no one noticed, because no one was supposed to except Lucy. She noticed the moment she looked up from her notebook and felt the room change, not louder, not brighter, but heavier, as if something important had quietly entered. She did not recognize his face at first. She recognized his eyes. And in that instant, before anyone could explain, before anyone could interrupt, before reality could catch up, Lucy stood, and the room went still. Lucy did not sit back down. She stood there beside her desk, her chair scraping softly against the floor, her fingers curled around the edge of her notebook, as if it were the only solid thing left in the room. The classroom had gone quiet in a way classrooms never did, not the forced quiet of discipline, but the uncertain quiet of something unexpected arriving without permission. The man at the door did not smile, not because he was cold, because he understood what a smile would do. It would turn this moment into a performance. Instead, he looked at Lucy the way people rarely looked at children, with attention that did not rush, with respect that did not need explaining. He nodded once slowly, as if acknowledging an agreement they had made. Without ever speaking it aloud, Eleanor Hayes felt the air shift beside her. She had been in that classroom long enough to recognize the sound of trouble before it spoke. This was not trouble the school could discipline. This was the kind that rearranged lives and left administrators scrambling to understand what they had missed. "May I?" the man asked quietly. His voice was calm, unassuming. Not the voice Lucy had imagined when she read the letter, but somehow closer. "Realer." Eleanor hesitated, not because she doubted him, but because she understood the rules of the world too well. Schools were not places for surprises. They were places for permissions, forms, approvals, signatures stacked on signatures, but she also understood children, and she understood promises. "Yes," she said, standing aside. "You may." The man stepped into the classroom. No cameras followed. No whispers ran ahead of him. There was no announcement, no fanfare. Just a stranger in a modest jacket walking between rows of desks that had seen more disappointment than celebration. He stopped beside Lucy's desk. "Hello," he said, not louder than a conversation between friends. "Thank you for waiting," Lucy swallowed. "Thank you for coming." The words surprised her as much as anyone else. She hadn't planned them. They rose from somewhere deeper than nerves, from the place where belief lived before it learned to be careful. Around them, the students watched, uncertain whether they were witnessing something important or something they were not allowed to touch. Children were experts at sensing significance without understanding it. Eleanor cleared her throat. "Class," she said gently, "please continue your reading." No one moved. The man glanced at Eleanor, then back at Lucy. "Would you walk with me?" he asked. "Just for a moment." Lucy looked at her teacher. Eleanor nodded once. They stepped into the hallway together. Word travels strangely in schools. It does not sprint. It leaks. By the time Lucy and the man returned 15 minutes later, the principal had already heard something, a rumor with no shape, a question with no answer. Someone important. Someone unexpected. Someone not on the schedule. "What is this?" the principal asked Eleanor in a low voice. Eleanor did not raise her own. "It's a visit." "From whom?" Eleanor looked at Lucy, then back at the principal. "From someone who kept his word." The principal frowned. "This isn't appropriate." Dean, because by then Eleanor knew exactly who he was, did not interrupt. He waited. He had spent decades learning when silence was more powerful than defense. "I'll leave if you ask me to," he said calmly. "I came without expectation." The principal studied him, searching for arrogance, entitlement, celebrity certainty. She found none. "What do you want?" she asked finally. Dean answered without hesitation. "I want to listen." Listening, it turned out, was far more disruptive than speaking. Lucy spoke quietly at first. About numbers. About helping her mother. About wanting to be useful. About feeling like effort disappeared the moment it left her hands. She did not dramatize her life. She described it the way people do when they have never believed their story was interesting enough to be told. Dean did not respond with advice. He asked questions. How long had she liked math? What did she read when she had time? What made her feel capable? And then, without warning, he asked the question Eleanor would remember for the rest of her life. Who taught you to think you were ordinary? Lucy blinked. I don't know, she said honestly. I just am. Dean shook his head gently. No one just is. The principal shifted uncomfortably. This was not a conversation she could categorize. It was not mentoring, not instruction, not charity. It was something more dangerous. Recognition. That afternoon, Dean did something that could not be undone. He asked Lucy to bring her mother to the school the next day. No reason given, no explanation offered. When the principal objected softly, then more firmly Dean did not argue. He did not invoke his name. He did not threaten influence. He simply said, if you don't allow it, I will understand, but I won't forget it. That was enough. Lucy's mother arrived the next day still wearing her work uniform. Her hair pulled back quickly, her eyes tired with the kind of exhaustion that came from always preparing for disappointment. She assumed this was a problem, a misunderstanding, a warning. When she saw Dean, she stopped short. He stood before she could speak. Thank you for coming, he said. I'm sorry I didn't give you more notice. Her hands trembled. I don't understand. Dean gestured toward a chair. Then let me explain. He told her about the letter. About the teacher who believed in her daughter enough to risk being wrong. About Lucy's quiet discipline. About effort unseen. He did not flatter Lucy. He did not exaggerate her potential. He spoke as if describing something obvious, something already there, waiting to be noticed. I'm not here to offer money, he said. I'm here to offer access. The word landed heavily. Lucy's mother stared at him. Access to what? Dean met her eyes. To opportunity without humiliation. Silence followed. In that silence, something inside Lucy's mother broke not loudly. Not publicly, but completely. Years of explaining. Years of apologizing. Years of shrinking herself to fit the space the world offered her child. She covered her face. I don't know how to accept this, she whispered. Dean's voice softened. You don't have to accept anything today. What happened next never appeared in magazines. There were no photographs of the meetings that followed. No interviews about the scholarships quietly arranged. No headlines about the introductions made not to executives, not to celebrities, but to teachers. Mentors, people who worked where. Talent mattered more than background. Dean insisted on one. Condition: Lucy's name would never be used. Publicly, no one should have to become a story to deserve. Help, he said. That condition angered people, agents, publicists even. Friends questioned it. Why hide it? They asked. This could inspire millions. Dean answered the same way every time. It inspired the one it was meant to. But secrecy has a cost. Someone noticed the visits. Someone recognized the car. Someone connected the dots. A reporter called Dot. Then another. A question began circulating quietly in rooms Dean no longer trusted. Why is he involved with that school? And with that question came suspicion. Assumptions. The dangerous hunger of a world that no longer believed kindness could exist without motive. Dean was given a choice. Deny everything and let Lucy remain protected, or speak once, carefully, and risk turning her life into something she never asked for. He sat alone that night, the same way he had when he first opened Eleanor's letter. And for the second time, he chose the harder path. The question reached Dean Martin late at night, carried not by accusation but by curiosity, the kind that pretended to be harmless. Why that school? It came from someone he trusted, someone who understood the rules. Someone who knew how easily good intentions could be twisted into something unrecognizable. Dean did not answer right away. He had learned, over years of interviews and misunderstandings, that the most dangerous questions were the ones asked softly. They invited explanation, then reshaped it into spectacle. By morning, the calls multiplied. No one knew Lucy's name yet. No one mentioned Eleanor Hayes, but the curiosity had teeth now. Rumors grew legs. A quiet visit became a pattern. A letter became a relationship. Silence became suspicion. Dean was advised to shut it down. Say it was a misunderstanding. Say it was charity work. Say nothing at all. Every option protected him. Only one protected. Lucy at school. The change arrived before the cameras did. Lucy felt it first in the way people looked at her, not with cruelty, not even with jealousy, but with attention that did not belong to her. Teachers watched her longer. Classmates whispered more carefully. The principal became unusually formal. Opportunity, Lucy learned quickly, could feel like pressure when it was wrapped in expectation. One afternoon, Eleanor found Lucy alone in the classroom, erasing the board long after dismissal. "You don't have to stay," Eleanor said gently. Lucy nodded but kept erasing. "I know." Eleanor watched her for a moment. "Are you scared?" Lucy hesitated. Then quietly, "A little of what?" Lucy stopped. "Of becoming someone people argue about instead of listen to?" Eleanor felt the truth of that land heavy in her chest. The reporter arrived the next day anyway. He waited outside the school. Polite, patient, holding a notebook instead of a microphone, as if that made him less intrusive. He asked for a comment, for context. For clarity, the principal refused him, so he waited. Dean heard about it before noon, that afternoon. He canceled a meeting he had been preparing for months. He told his assistant to clear the evening. He asked for a single chair, a table, and no cameras. When the reporter arrived, Dean did not sit behind a desk. He sat across from him. "You're looking for a story?" Dean said calmly. "I'm looking for the truth," the reporter replied. Dean nodded, then listened carefully. "I will say this once." He did not mention Lucy's name. He did not describe her circumstances. He did not paint himself as a savior. "I received a letter," he said, "from a teacher who believed that kindness still mattered even when no one was obligated to show it. I responded not as a celebrity, but as a person who remembers being unseen." The reporter leaned forward. "Why involve yourself further?" Dean met his eyes. "Because the world teaches children very early that effort without recognition is pointless." "I disagree." "Isn't this favoritism?" the reporter asked. Dean's voice did not change. "Favoritism is choosing someone because they benefit you. This benefited no one except the child who needed to know she mattered." Silence followed. "And why the secrecy?" the reporter pressed. Dean's answer was immediate. "Because dignity does not need witnesses." That was all he said. No quotes designed for headlines. No moral speeches. No attempt to control the narrative. The reporter left with less than he wanted and more than he expected. The article that followed disappointed. Everyone who wanted drama, there were no names. No photographs. No accusations. Just a quiet account of a letter. A response and a boundary that refused to be crossed. Some readers called it boring. Others called it refreshing. Lucy never read it. The real test came months later. Lucy was offered a chance to attend a program most students from her school never even heard about. Advanced, demanding, far from home. It came with whispers she only got in because Lucy sat at the kitchen table with the acceptance letter unopened. Her mother watched her carefully. "You don't have to go," she said. Lucy shook her head. "I want to." "Then what's stopping you?" Lucy looked up. "I want to go knowing I earned it." So she did something no one expected. She asked to be tested again. No letters. No recommendations. No names attached. Just her work. The program agreed. She passed years later. Dean would receive another letter. This one was typed confident. Clear, it thanked him not for opportunity, not for access, but for restraint. You showed me that being helped doesn't mean being owned, it said. You showed me that kindness can be quiet and still be powerful. Dean read it alone. He folded it carefully, and once again. He did something no Hollywood star would likely do today, he told no one. Because the truest acts of kindness are not performed, they are protected.